I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to cross certain lines. But that night, standing in front of the mirror wearing something I'd never imagined myself in, I realized I had become someone I didn't recognize anymore. And the worst part? I liked it. My name is Sarah, I'm 34 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. My husband, David, and I had been together for 9 years, married for 7. We lived in a comfortable house in Portland, had good jobs, a golden retriever named Max, and what everyone called a picture-perfect relationship. But behind closed doors, something had been dying slowly, like a plant you forget to water until it's too late to save. It started so innocently. One night, after we'd both had a bit too much wine at dinner, David looked at me with that nervous smile he gets when he wants to say something, but isn't sure how I'll react. "I've been thinking," he said, running his fingers through his hair the way he always does when he's anxious. "Maybe we could try something different. To bring back that spark we used to have." I remember laughing, thinking he was going to suggest a weekend trip, or maybe trying a new restaurant. But what he proposed that night opened a door I never knew existed. And once you walk through some doors, you can't just walk back and pretend you never saw what was on the other side. He wanted me to play a role, to become someone else for him, not just in our bedroom, but out there, in the real world. He wanted me to go to a bar, dress like I was single, and let him watch me from across the room while other men tried to talk to me. "It's just fantasy," he assured me, his eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in years. "Nothing real will happen. It's just about the thrill, the excitement of seeing you through fresh eyes." And you know what the saddest part was? I was so desperate to feel wanted again, so tired of being invisible in my own marriage, that I said yes. If you're listening to this story and wondering what happened next, please take a moment and click that subscribe button. I'm sharing the most vulnerable moment of my life here, and your support means everything. We're working towards 17,000 subscribers, and every single person who joins this community helps us continue sharing real stories from real people. Just hit that red subscribe button right now. The first time was supposed to be the only time. I spent hours getting ready, choosing a dress I'd bought years ago but never had the courage to wear, something David had never seen me in. It was black, fitted, and made me feel like someone who lived a completely different life than mine. I did my makeup darker than usual, wore my hair down in loose waves, and when I looked at myself in that mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. David kissed me before I left, whispered, "Remember, it's just a game," and I could see the excitement in his eyes. He would arrive at the bar 30 minutes after me, sit in a corner where I wouldn't acknowledge him, and just watch. The Riverside Bar in downtown Portland was dimly lit, filled with people who all seemed to be escaping from something. I sat at the bar, ordered a martini I had no intention of finishing, and tried to ignore the way my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the music. It didn't take long for someone to approach. His name was Marcus. He said he worked in tech, and he had this confidence that David had lost somewhere along the way. We talked for maybe 20 minutes, and I could feel David's eyes on me from across the room, and something inside me came alive in a way it hadn't in years. But here's where everything started to change. Marcus was charming, funny, and he looked at me like I was the only person in that entire bar. When he asked for my number, I was supposed to say no. That was the rule David and I had agreed on. But instead, I found myself typing my real number into his phone, watching him smile as he saved it under Mystery Woman, and feeling a thrill that terrified me. When I finally left and met David in the parking lot, his face was flushed, his hands were shaking, and for the first time in years, we felt connected again. We didn't talk about the fact that I'd given Marcus my number. I told myself it didn't matter because I'd never respond anyway. I want to pause here and ask you something. If you're finding this story compelling, if you're wondering what choices I made next, please help this channel reach 17,000 subscribers. Your subscription is completely free. It takes just 1 second, and it helps us create more content like this. Click subscribe and be part of this community that shares real, unfiltered stories. Marcus texted me the next morning, just a simple, "Great meeting you last night," with a coffee emoji. I stared at that message for probably 10 minutes before deleting it without responding, but he texted again the next day, and the day after that. His messages were never pushy, never inappropriate, just friendly and funny, and exactly the kind of attention I'd been craving. After a week, I responded. Just a casual reply. Nothing that crossed any lines. But we both knew that responding at all was crossing a line of its own. David wanted to do it again. 2 weeks after that first night, he suggested we go back to the same bar, play the same game. This time felt different because I knew Marcus might text me afterward, and I knew I'd probably respond. The second night was almost identical to the first, except this time David wanted to push it further. He wanted me to dance with whoever approached me. He wanted to see me laugh and touch someone else's arm the way I used to touch his. And I did. I danced with a man whose name I never learned, felt his hands on my waist, and saw David watching from the shadows with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it excitement? Jealousy? Regret? Maybe all three. Marcus and I started texting regularly after that. Nothing physical had happened, nothing had even been suggested, but we were building something. An emotional connection that felt more dangerous than anything physical could have been. He told me about his divorce, about his daughter who lived with his ex-wife in Seattle, about how lonely he felt in a city full of people. And I told him things I hadn't told anyone in years. Not the truth about my marriage or about how I'd met him, but truths about who I was, what I wanted, what scared me. With Marcus, I felt seen in a way I hadn't felt seen in so long. David never asked if I was talking to anyone from those nights. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe the fantasy only worked if he could pretend it stayed contained in those few hours at the bar. But our marriage was changing. We were more passionate with each other, but also more distant in ways that are hard to explain. It was like we needed the fantasy to feel anything real, and that should have been a warning sign neither of us was willing to acknowledge. If you're still with me, listening to this story unfold, I need to ask you to do something. Press that subscribe button. We're so close to 17,000 subscribers, and your support makes it possible for people to share their stories without judgment. Just one click on that red button and you're part of something bigger. 3 months into this arrangement, David suggested something that made my stomach drop. He wanted me to actually meet one of these men for coffee, not at a bar, not with him watching, but a real date. I trust you, he said, and I wanted to scream that this wasn't about trust, that we'd already gone so far past trust that the word had lost all meaning. But I didn't scream. Instead, I nodded and tried to ignore the voice in my head asking what we were really doing to each other. I met Marcus for coffee on a Tuesday afternoon. I told David I was meeting a friend from work. The lie came so easily it frightened me. Marcus and I sat in a small cafe in the Pearl District for 3 hours, talking about everything and nothing. He told me I was beautiful. He told me he couldn't stop thinking about me. And when he reached across the table and took my hand, I didn't pull away. Nothing happened that day beyond that held hand, but we both knew something had shifted. This wasn't a game anymore. This was real, and it was dangerous, and I couldn't seem to make myself care. That night, David made love to me with an intensity we hadn't shared in years, and I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus, about his hand in mine, about the way he looked at me, about how he didn't know I was married, didn't know he was part of someone else's fantasy, didn't know that every moment he spent with me was being reported back to my husband in some twisted version of intimacy neither of us knew how to stop. The guilt started to eat at me. Not guilt about David, strangely enough. He'd asked for this. He'd created this situation. The guilt was about Marcus. He was falling for someone who didn't exist, for a version of me that was part truth and part performance, and he had no idea he was being used as a prop in someone else's marriage. I tried to pull back. I really did. I stopped responding to his texts as quickly. I made excuses when he wanted to meet again. But he was persistent in the gentlest way, and my resistance was already so weak. Before I continue, I want to remind you that your subscription helps this channel grow. We're building towards 17,000 subscribers, and every person who clicks that button helps us share more authentic stories. If this story is resonating with you, if you're curious about what happens next, please subscribe now. It's free, it's easy, and it means the world. 4 months in, everything fell apart in a way I never could have predicted. David came home from work early one Thursday, found me on the phone with Marcus, and the look on his face was something I'll never forget. It wasn't anger, it was worse. It was the realization that his fantasy had become my reality, and he had no one to blame but himself. We had our first real fight in years that night. He screamed that I'd betrayed him, that I'd taken things too far. I screamed back that he'd asked me to do this, that he'd pushed me into another man's arms and now wanted to act surprised that I'd actually gone. We said things we can't take back. We cried. We sat in silence for hours while the sun set and the room grew dark around us. The next morning, David asked me if I was in love with Marcus. I couldn't answer him. Not because the answer was yes, but because I genuinely didn't know anymore. What I felt for Marcus wasn't love exactly, but it wasn't not love either. It was possibility. It was escape. It was everything my marriage had stopped being, wrapped up in someone who still looked at me with wonder instead of familiarity. We tried to go back to normal. We really did. David said we should stop the games, delete the numbers, pretend none of it ever happened. But you can't unring a bell. You can't unknow what you've learned about yourself and your marriage. I tried not to contact Marcus, lasted almost 2 weeks, and then found myself texting him at midnight one random Tuesday, asking if he wanted to meet for coffee the next day. This is where I need you to make a choice too. If you're invested in this story, if you want to see more real-life stories like this one, click subscribe. We're working hard to reach 17,000 subscribers, and your support is what makes this possible. One click. That's all it takes. Hit that subscribe button right now and join our community. I met Marcus that Wednesday, and for the first time, I told him the truth. Not all of it, but enough. I told him I was married. I watched his face change, watched the hurt and betrayal flash across his eyes, and I waited for him to walk away. But he didn't. Instead, he asked me if I loved my husband, and I told him the truth again. I said I didn't know anymore, that I thought I did. But that love and habit had become so intertwined I couldn't tell them apart. That I felt more alive in the 3 hours I spent with Marcus than I had in the 3 years of my marriage. He kissed me in the parking lot of that cafe. It was the first time we'd ever kissed, and it felt like both the most right and most wrong thing I'd ever done. My wedding ring pressed against his neck as I pulled him closer, and I couldn't stop thinking about David at home, probably wondering where I was, probably knowing exactly where I was and what I was doing. When I finally pulled away, Marcus asked me what I wanted. It was such a simple question, but I had no answer. I wanted everything. I wanted my safe, comfortable marriage and my exciting, dangerous affair. I wanted to feel wanted without hurting anyone. I wanted to go back in time and never agree to David's fantasy in the first place. I wanted to move forward and see where things with Marcus could go. I wanted contradictory, impossible things, and standing in that parking lot, I realized I had to choose. I drove home that afternoon with Marcus's taste still on my lips and David's dinner probably getting cold on the table. I walked into our house, saw my husband standing in the kitchen with that same nervous expression he'd had the night he suggested this whole thing, and I knew our marriage would never be the same regardless of what choice I made next. David knew something had happened. Maybe he could see it on my face. Or maybe after 9 years together, some things don't need to be said out loud. He asked me one question. Do you want to stay married? And I couldn't answer him. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I didn't know if staying was fair to either of us anymore. We'd built this marriage on a foundation that we'd both spent months undermining, and now we were standing in the rubble wondering if there was anything left worth saving. That night, David made a confession of his own. He told me that watching me with other men had stopped being exciting months ago, that it had become torture, watching me come alive for strangers in ways I never did for him anymore. He said he'd kept suggesting we continue because he was terrified that if we stopped, I'd realize how boring our real life had become and leave him anyway. He'd been feeding the very thing that was destroying us because he was too afraid to face our problems directly. We were both standing there, bleeding from wounds we'd inflicted on each other, and neither of us knew how to stop. I want to pause one more time and ask for your support. If this story is making you feel something, if you're wondering how this all ends, please click that subscribe button. Help us reach 17,000 subscribers. Your subscription is free, takes 1 second, and helps real people share their real stories. Click subscribe now. I told David about the kiss. I watched him process it. Watched his hands shake. Watched him try to decide if he was allowed to be angry about something he'd essentially asked me to do. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just asked me if I was going to see Marcus again. And I told him honestly that I didn't know. That I needed time to figure out what I wanted, who I was outside of this mess we'd created together. Marcus called me the next day. Told me he'd been thinking about what I said, about my marriage and my confusion. He said he cared about me, but he couldn't be someone's escape route. That if I wanted to be with him, I needed to actually leave David, not just keep one foot in each world until I decided which was more comfortable. He gave me an ultimatum, something David had never done in 9 years of marriage. Choose me, or lose me. Simple as that. So now I'm standing at this impossible crossroads. My husband, who started all of this, wants to pretend none of it happened and go back to the marriage that was dying slowly before any of this began. Marcus, who I've known for less than 6 months, wants me to burn my life down and start over with him, build something real from this foundation of lies and fantasy. And I'm standing here, trying to figure out which choice I can actually live with and which choice will haunt me for the rest of my life. David and I have been sleeping in separate rooms for the past week. We're polite to each other, careful, like we're handling something fragile that could shatter at any moment. He asked me yesterday if I've made a decision, and I told him the truth. I'm terrified. I'm terrified of staying in a marriage that might never recover from this. I'm terrified of leaving for someone I barely know, someone who only fell for me because of the most elaborate lie I've ever told. I'm terrified of making the wrong choice and spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd chosen differently. Last night, I sat in my car outside Marcus's apartment for an hour, my phone in my hand, David's number on the screen, trying to decide if I was going to call my husband and tell him I was coming home, or if I was going to walk up those stairs and see if this thing with Marcus could actually be something real. I still don't know what I'm going to do. Part of me thinks I should leave both of them, that I need to figure out who I am without any man defining me, without anyone's fantasy or expectations shaping my choices. But part of me is so tired of being alone in my own head that I just want someone to tell me what to do, to make this decision for me so I don't have to carry the weight of it. Here's what I do know. My marriage was dying long before that first night at the bar. David's fantasy didn't kill it. It just exposed what was already dead. We'd been going through the motions for so long that we'd forgotten what it felt like to actually choose each other every day. And maybe that's the real tragedy here. Not the affair, not the lies, not even the betrayal. But the fact that we let our marriage become something so empty that we needed this kind of chaos just to feel anything at all. Marcus texted me this morning, just 3 words. I'm still waiting. And David texted me 10 minutes later. Also just 3 words. Please come home. 2 men, 2 completely different futures, and me stuck in the middle trying to figure out which future belongs to me. Before I finish this story, I need to ask one more time. If you've listened this far, if you're wondering what I'm going to do, please subscribe to this channel. We're so close to 17,000 subscribers, and every person who joins this community makes it possible for more people to share their truths. Click that red subscribe button. Do it now. Be part of this journey with us. So here I am, telling you this story because I have no one else to tell it to. My friends would judge me. My family would take sides. But you listening to this right now, you don't know me. You can't see my face or hear the shame in my voice when I admit the things I've done. Maybe that's why I'm telling you, because I need someone to hear this. To bear witness to this moment in my life where everything could go one way or the other, and I'm paralyzed by the weight of choosing. What would you do in my place? Would you stay with the man you've known for 9 years? Try to rebuild something from the ashes of what you destroyed together? Would you take a chance on something new with someone who makes you feel alive, even if it's built on a foundation of lies? Or would you walk away from both of them and try to figure out who you are when you're not playing a role in someone else's story? I need to make a decision soon. David's given me until the end of this week. Marcus is losing patience, and I'm running out of places to hide from this choice. Part of me thinks there's no right answer here, that every option leads to pain and regret, and wondering what if. But I have to choose something, because staying in this limbo is killing me slowly, and I've already lost enough of myself in this mess. So I'm asking you, really asking you, Not as some rhetorical device, but as someone who genuinely doesn't know what to do. What would you do in my place? Leave a comment. Tell me what you think. Because I need perspectives outside of my own head right now. I need to hear from people who aren't me, who aren't living in this disaster, who can maybe see something I can't see anymore. And if you've made it this far, if you've listened to this entire story, please click subscribe. Help us reach 17,000 subscribers. Your support means everything, and it helps us continue sharing these real, messy, complicated stories that don't have easy answers. I still don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm running out of time to decide, and whichever choice I make, I'll have to live with it for the rest of my life. So tell me, what would you do? Because right now, I honestly don't know.